Hey guys, today we're going to go over a principle that really needs to be covered in order to deeply understand SMART. We're going to explore what he calls a strict sense of identity. Identity can actually be defined in many different ways, but he wants to say, nope, this is what it is, and I mean it directly. I mean it in a very strict sense. So, we're going to explore what he means by that. We will explore how SMART posits not only tells us the strict identity, but also develops it. And then we're going to name, define, and interrelate key terms to achieve that overall goal. We're going to explore a summary of how he defines and argues for a strict sense of identity. And then we're going to read and trace his ideas, which we've already explored in the summary. Okay, so write these three success criteria down for me, please, and score yourself out of 4 for each of them. And once you've done that, can you do me the favor, pretty please, with the cherry on top, of just having a look at this picture and write down a reflection about, well, how would we use continuity to explain what we see? That'd be great. Okay, so what really needs to be explored is that we start off kind of encountering this assertion that by identity he means a strict sense of the word. One of the examples he gives is, if I'm going to define 7, well, one way that I can pin it down and be very strict about what it actually is to say 7 is the smallest prime number greater than 5. It's a very strict pin down identity. Of course, we can define it other ways using the same strictness, but here is a really strict and exact definition of what it is. He also says the same about lightning. Lightning is electrical discharge. It's the same thing. Now, the reason why he likes this analogy of lightning is the same thing as electrical discharge is because he says this is the perfect analogy I can use to explain mental, mental states or mental processes or brain sensations, for a better term, and brain processes themselves, or the physical processes. So he basically says, look, what we see as lightning can be explained from the point of view of science, which says that as water vapor accumulates, it creates an ionization in the cloud, and the surplus charge that builds up is discharged in the form of lightning. Lightning is nothing but this scientific process explained. Though we see it directly as lightning, we also accept that it is as the scientific process explains it. The two things are the same. Now you might be confused, why do I use double equals? Double equals is a comparison operator that we use in programming language. And I just like to point out that when we do our notes, we can use our own conventions and shorthand for making our own notes. And that's why I use the double equals. It's the thing that I do. Okay. So he also says that this scientific process is basically the same thing that we observed in the same location in the same time. There really is nothing. So when I see exclamation mark and equals, that means does not equal in programming language, okay? Lightning does not equal anything that is mysterious or other than this scientific process. It is the scientific process of ionic charge building up and accumulating in a cloud, and then, of course, discharging itself and earthing itself when it hits the ground. So he says the same thing about mental processes, right? Let's have a look. He says basically scientific processes can be used to explain lightning, and also the sensations we experience can be used using scientific language to describe sensation. In other words, I guess what I'm saying is, that's kind of a tautology. Let me be a bit clearer. Physical processes can be used, just like they are with lightning, to explain sensations. Scientific language can be used, just like they are with lightning, to explain sensations. We may observe them differently, but we can use the scientific language to explain them. Makes sense. So start taking some notes. So, what does this mean for identity? Well, having just gone over all the analogies and what we can conclude from them, we might come up with a bit of a formula for explaining what identity is in the strict sense. That's important, guys, in the strict sense. And we are provided with a little bit of a formula. So x equals y if and only if, that's why I've got IFF, x and y are spatially and temporally coexistent. So they have to be in the same space, same location. Obviously, that makes them the same thing. Take a note. So, sensations are brain processes if and only if they occur in the same location at the same time. Okay? So what does this mean? Well, this actually gives us another little important point to argue. We defined that the instant of a sensation equals the instant of the brain process in the strict sense. The one instant, because they would occur same place and same time. They're the same object. But we do tend to think of identity in different ways. Now, we could argue that the lightning was just an after effect, something we saw visually after the discharge. But that's not what Smart would argue. In fact, Smart would argue, no, the lightning we see is simply a report of that visual, the lightning, ontologically, what the lightning is nothing but the physical processes that science can use to explain it. So if we're going to then define identity as continuity over space and time, we can't do that. The strict identity principle means same object, same time. Obviously, we're going to move around, we're going to grow, we're going to change, we're going to evolve. So a person in and of themselves doesn't meet the criteria for a strict identity. Only the instances of the person or only the sensations and the brain processes, because they are the same instance in the same space and the same time. Not all the sensations tied together over time, because they don't have that exact strict sameness. Take a note. So you're not, in the strict identity sense, the same if you have a continuity over space and time, which is what a person is. Let's read what he says. Remarks on identity. When I say that a sensation is a brain process or that lightning is an electric discharge, I'm using the is in the sense of strict identity. Makes sense given the summary we've seen so far. Just as in the case of the necessary proposition, 7 is identical with the smallest prime number greater than 5. Again, refer to the above. When I say that a sensation is a brain process or that lightning is an electric discharge, I do not mean just that the sensation is somehow spatially or temporally continuous. In other words, he's not saying that the sensation happens after a different time, a different place with the brain process, or that the lightning is just spatially or temporally continuous with the discharge. He doesn't believe that at all. There's no continuity. One doesn't happen after the other, right? When, on the other hand, I say that the unsuccessful general is the same person as the small boy who stole the apples, I mean only that the successful general I see before me is a time slice of the same four-dimensional object of which the small boy stealing the apples is an earlier time slice. Now, we didn't really summarize over that, but that's okay, all right? Because it's pretty easy to get what he's saying, okay? Let's quickly go over it. I like the fact that he referenced time slice, and I like the fact that he mentioned that a human being is a four-dimensional object. Now, because as the general grows up into a grown man, just like here, obviously we've got little pieces of who he is that occur over time in different spaces and different times. And when we say time slice, we're talking about that instant in time where he was in that specific but different place, okay? So what he's saying here is that when he's talking about the identity of the general, right, who stole the apples, he means that only in the sense that he's talking about the strict identity process only applies when we look at the time slice, okay? Take a note. And then he goes on to say, however, the four-dimensional object which has the general I see before me for its time slice is identical in the strict sense with the four-dimensional object which has the small boy stealing apples for an early time slice. Let's read this again, okay? However, the four-dimensional object which has the general I see before me for its late time slice is identical to, in the strict sense, with the four-dimensional object which has the small boy stealing apples for an early time slice. All right, so what we've here is we're saying when, on the other hand, I say the successful general is the same person in the small boy who stole the apples, I mean only the successful general I see before me is a time slice. So in other words, the general that immediately I see before me is a time slice of the four-dimensional object. So the thing that I'm actually observing right here and the right now is a time slice, an instant of the physical makeup of what I sense, okay? However, when we talk about the four-dimensional object in and of itself, right, not necessarily the time slice, we would actually have to say that the four-dimensional object, which occurs over time and all dimensions of space, is the whole continuity of the different time slices, okay? Take a note. And here, it gets really confusing again. I don't think he's that clear. But what he's basically saying is, I distinguish these two senses is identical with. So what he's saying is, when I talk about the four-dimensional object, which is really about continuity over space and time, he's distinguishing that against the strict sense of identity, all right? I distinguish these two senses of is identical with because I wish to make it clear that the brain process doctrine asserts identity in the strict sense. In other words, it is the one thing I see occurring in the same space at the same time, and it's actually a time slice of a four-dimensional object, of which a person could be. But when I talk about brain processes, I'm not talking about anything with continuity. I'm just talking about the one brain process that gave rise to the one sensation. In one space, one time, they are ontologically identical. Take a note. Okay, so let's go back, shall we? Let's have a look at our goals. All right, here we go. We're going to explore how SMART posits the strict sense of identity. Strict sense of identity means that it must occur in the same space and the same time, be the same time slice, okay? There can't be any continuity over space and time. That's still an identity, but it's not the strict sense of identity. We've named and defined key terms. Continuity should be coming out of your wazoo right now, and you should be thinking a lot about space, time, location, strict sense. These are terms that should be occurring, okay, in your mind. We summarized what it meant. We didn't really look at a summary about the apples, but that's because that refers to SMART is actually referring to a text that we're going to be reading when we study what's called personal identity. And one criticism of a theory that we studied called John Locke's theory is basically that when we look at the theory of psychological identity or psychological continuity, you'll know what I mean. We'll explore it then. We won't do it now. But basically, understanding the apples example and the general is really important because it helps us understand Oliver Reed's criticism of Locke's theory, pretty much. And then of course, we read and we traced his ideas. Okay, so that's all very confusing right now. But I don't think the way that we outlined it was that confusing. I'll just say the extra part that it alludes to in the psychological identity or the personal identities unit. That's probably where you got a bit confused. As I was trying to explain the importance of the apple example. However, basically, if you understand that the strict sense of identity is that you have to basically be in the same place, the same time, you're spatially and temporally coexistent. You know, you are a time slice of the four-dimensional object. That's cool. You can't be a four-dimensional object because the four-dimensional object has continuity of space and time. It doesn't occur exactly in a strict sense. All right, and that's it. Cheers.